Okay, for those of you that are just joining us, we have a poll that we put up. If you wouldn't mind taking just a quick second to answering those questions. Again, my name is Jenny, and I am just here to help Sarah and Laura with the webinar. I want to welcome you to Remote Strong, a webinar on creating and managing an effective remote workforce. I know you will learn a great deal from Sarah and Laura. They've compiled a lot of great information here. We invite you to ask questions throughout the webinar. At the end, we'll have a question and answer session, and I will compile and put those questions together so they can be answered. But before the question and answer, there is going to be some special offerings that Sarah Skowronski from EOS Human Resources Consulting is going to have, and Laura Renner from Freedom Makers Virtual Assistant Services. So without further ado, I'm going to let them take the floor.
Thank you, Jenny. Well, we are really excited to have you here, to have everybody here today. Laura and I are good friends, and when we sat down and decided, we were talking about, how can we help people, how can we bring information out, we realized that our two services align really well together, and we could share a lot of information. And so it's my pleasure to introduce to everybody Laura Renner from Freedom Makers. Laura is, as I said, a good friend of mine, and we actually met when I started as an entrepreneur, when I started my consulting firm, and she had another business. But watching Laura and how she's grown her business, and the information and skills that she's brought from the U.S. Air Force and from earning her MBA at University of Chicago has really been inspiring to me. She thinks outside of the box constantly. She has great ideas. She creates these systems, and she thinks in a way that challenges me and gets me to think in new ways. And she brings that to her clients and brings that structure to her clients. And she created Freedom Makers to support the military and their spouses wherever they are. So it allows military spouses to be virtual assistants anywhere in the world to her clients. And so I'm really excited to be able to share this time presenting with Laura.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so we thought we would introduce each other because as women, right, one of the things that a lot of women struggle with is talking about ourselves. So we thought it'd be easier if we just talked about each other. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Sarah. And Sarah is the principal consultant at EOS HR, which she started a few years ago and basically does HR for small companies up to 50 employees. It's for companies that they need HR, but they don't have enough of a need to hire someone full-time. So they'll hire Sarah's company to run their HR for them. And one of the things that's always impressed me about Sarah is that she knows business as well. So when she's advising clients on their HR, their human capital needs or strategy, she's coming to them from this experience of business. So she knows what else they're facing and can balance that. And so that's one of the things I've always been impressed with her. And she has like a crazy background of all these different industries that she's worked in before she started in HR, and then she built up her expertise in HR. And so she kind of brings all of that together into EOS, and I just think that's really neat to see. And she has set up that culture with her team as well. So the advice they're giving is not just HR advice, it's HR for business, and that's what I really like and I'm always impressed by.
Thank you.
All right, well, one of the things we wanted to get started with today is sort of talk about mindset around setting up a remote workforce. I want to say too, I know we have a sort of a wide variety of people on our webinar today, or maybe you're watching the recording later, but our default assumption is that everyone is a small business owner. However, this is applicable to anyone who's running a remote team. but I just know that our default is coming from someone who's a small business owner. And I actually heard this question put to me a few weeks ago by a senior leader in the Air Force. And that is, when you're facing, right now we're facing an unprecedented issue, but in general, when you're thinking about your business, instead of saying, why should I do it that way? Ask yourself, why can't I do it that way? And that really opens up a lot of opportunities for how you can think about ways that you want to run your business or run your team. And so that's our challenge for you today, is have that mindset of, why can't I do it this way? Why can't I have a remote force or a remote business or something like that? So that's kind of the mindset that we want to go through today. So we thought we'd start with it kind of going through the myths or the cons, if you will, of why businesses have resisted having remote workers for a long time. Part of it starts with immediately with productivity concerns. I think a lot of people assume that people, when they work from home, they're spending more time on Netflix than they are working. And so, yeah, so I'll let Sarah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and this is a really prevalent thought, because even I was on a webinar earlier this week where somebody was saying, oh, you know, when people are working from home, they're not productive and they're not getting the work done, and it's not a good way of a good use of the time. But studies actually have shown that when people are working in an office, you're not getting 8 hours of work out of them. You might be getting 3 to 4 hours of actual work between you know, talking and chatting to their coworkers or being distracted, and that time that it takes from being distracted to get back to work. All of those different components actually minimize the amount of productivity when you're in an office space. But when you're working from home and you're focused, you get a lot more done. And it may not be the in the same way that people are used to. It's not necessarily an 8 to 5 and, you know, kind of your butts in the seat and you're working the entire time, but the amount of output is the same or greater than what you might get for somebody in the office.
Exactly. I was thinking of an example. So let's just say sort of like a printing company that prints signs or, you know, products, things like that. And so in that case, you know, you might have a worker that will edit the graphic that they get from a client in order for it to be printed. And so whenever an order comes in, you see them, you physically see them editing that product or that image to get ready for print. Or you can, because they're next to you, you can be like, hey, that order came in, go take care of it. And then, but if they're not doing it, you see them talking to a client or you see them at lunch. So you're like, oh, I understand why they haven't started. But if they're working from home and you see the order come in and 2 hours have gone by and they haven't done it yet, you're like, what are they doing? They're just being lazy. And so I think that's part of, we're going to talk about shifting that mindset around productivity and what that means when they're working from home, because part of the benefit of working from home is there's more focus time, right? And that goes into our second point of when they're out of sight, they're out of mind, right? So say you have a hybrid team and you have a person in the office who's able to edit and a person at home who's able to edit, you're gonna maybe give it to the person in the office because you see them and then you forget about the person who's at home who could actually get it done faster because they're not having interruptions coming to them from the office.
Right, and it's important that you maintain, and we're going to talk a lot about communication and different tools that you can use, but when you are doing remote work, that you're doing it intentionally and you're keeping people engaged, and you're keeping your pulse on everybody that's working, rather than just the people who might be in front of you.
And then that leads to the other point where if they're out of sight, then you're not using them and then they disengage. And then so it becomes this cycle, right? Because then they disengage, then you're worried about their productivity and it just becomes this vicious cycle, right?
Right. If they don't feel like they're valued, then they are going to end up watching Netflix all day. They are going to end up, you know, sitting and watching the Wendy show, or going out for walks and taking advantage of that time. But if you keep them engaged, they're going to work harder and smarter for you and be more productive. The next one is time tracking, and this is that people are either inflating the amount of time that they're working, or that they are they're not doing their full 8 hours of work, which kind of goes back to the initial myth that I talked about, of that statistically people who are in the office, just because they're there for 8 hours doesn't mean they're working for 8 hours. And now there's so many tools out there for time tracking that you can actually see and ask them to report on exactly what they're doing. So you can see what project they were working on, and you can see what tasks they completed, and you can also manage to that. So if somebody is taking longer to do something than you think they should, you can that's also a trigger for some coaching and some training that might have to happen, and you have more access, more visibility into that, because you're tracking their time in this way than you might if they were just sitting in the office.
Indeed, there's a project management tool that has a time tracking in it. So when you're working on that task, you hit start and stop for that specific task. So you get a lot more information about how your team is working by using those tools, which you can use in the office too, but it also helps with the time tracking concerns from a remote workforce.
Right. And then the last one is distrust of team. And this is something where there are, because people are not there, because now you've got disengaged workers, because people are out of sight, out of mind, you're not trusting each other. And it has to, as a business owner or the manager, you have to trust your team and make sure that you know what level that they're working at, and they know that you trust them so that they can continue to do their work.
I think too, one of the things we'll talk about later is, I always like to say, it's your sandbox. Especially as the business owner, you get to choose who plays in your sandbox and how they play in your sandbox, within reason, of course, right? You don't want to, Sarah will talk about the legalities, but you get to choose that. And so if there's someone that you don't trust to work from home, you might want to consider if they even belong in your company. And we're not talking about trust necessarily from like a theft of time. I mean, of course, that's part of it. But even if you don't trust that they're reliable enough to get the work done, then that's something you may want to consider, is, do they really belong in your sandbox? And then, you know, and that relates to running your business in general. So,
right.
So we thought we'd spin it now to the positive side, or what are the traits that successful remote teams have in common? And I think from why businesses have resisted remote work, those reasons, a lot of it is, how do you shift? I think in office, it's more about time, as Sarah was saying, butts in seat. But when you have a remote team, you have to shift to being more results focused. So using that example of the printing company, yeah, maybe he doesn't do it right away, but if you have an expectation that all graphics that come in are edited within a certain amount of time, then you're not worried about when they did it, more was it done. So successful remote companies tend to be more results focused rather than time focused.
Right. The next one is clear expectations. And again, Laura talked about, you know, this is your sandbox, but this is really about having a definition of what you want that person to do very specifically and what you expect of them. And this is not only just their job, but how you expect it to do, how you expect them to do it, when you expect it to be done. So, you know, because it's your sandbox, because you need to trust them, you need to understand in yourself what amount of time do you want to allow them to do a job, and you have to be realistic in that, but what about amount of time do you want to allow them that before you feel like you're losing trust in them. So, you know, going back to the example of the graphics designer there, you know, does that need to be done in 5 minutes? Most likely it can be done within a day, or within, you know, whatever kind of expectations you're setting with your clients, but you want to make sure it's very clear that if something comes in, it needs to be done by this time, and that's how you're building the trust between you and your team.
And that really goes in well to defined lanes of responsibility and authority. When I think part of the issue is when you have an on-site team, that becomes less important, especially for a small business, because you can say, Joe, take care of that. Amy, take care of that. But when everyone is dispersed or distributed, it's harder to have that sort of control as far as time, right? Because not everyone's going to be online at the same time. So by having defined lanes of responsibility and authority, people can do their job without you telling them to, if that makes sense. And so an example, sort of a clear example, I think, is from Tim Ferriss's book, 4-Hour Work Week. He talked about how he was selling a product and he hired an outsourced call center to deal with any product issues. And he basically told them, if you can resolve the customer's issue with less than $200, do it. If you need more than $200, that's when you contact me. So that was the level of authority that he gave to that call center that he contracted with, that they had the authority to resolve any customer issues as long as it costs less than $200. And so that to me, that's like a clear example of how you can set authority where they can do their job without having to come to you or turn to you if they're, in the desk next to you type thing, and which frees up the time needed to work from home and shifts it to being more results focused. And going back to the lanes of responsibility, I remember I had a corporate job and my boss had given us, our lanes of responsibility, and she left and her boss came to fill in while they replaced her. And I don't know if he didn't know or he just didn't think that way or what, but he started sort of assigning people projects or tasks outside of their lanes of responsibility, to the point where it made me question my value, because things that I was supposed to be responsible for, he was assigning to other people. And so I think he just didn't know what the lanes of responsibility were, but I started wondering, does he not value me and what I can do? Because stuff that I was supposed to be assigned has been assigned to other people. So when you have those defined lanes of responsibility, it increases that trust going back and forth, because they know what they need to do and they're going to be able to take care of it, and you're going to trust that they are taking care of it.
Right, definitely. So the next one is deliberate communication. And this is a huge one when you're working with distributed teams and remote teams, because you don't have the hallway conversations. You don't have the water cooler conversations. You need to make sure that any information is being disseminated to all of your employees, and that any updates to information is being disseminated to those people. So everybody that, at whatever tool you choose to use, and Laura's going to talk a little bit more about tools, but you have to make sure that you're updating that information, that the people are not in a vacuum and feel like they don't know what's going on because they're not in the office.
Exactly. And it's one of those things, I see it when it's easy to fall into this habit just because you're there, right? So you see someone in the hallway, you're like, oh, by the way, the client wanted this. And so then now the person who heard that knows that, but no one else knows that. And maybe it's easier to, when you're together in an office, you can be like, oh yeah, I told so-and-so that the client wanted this, but the person working from home won't know that. And that leads to that then disengagement, that lack of productivity, and the lack of trust. And so when we'll talk about this in more detail, but having that deliberate communication setup helps to prevent that, which then in all of these things leads to the upward cycle of building trust on each other.
Right. Anything else we want to say about that, or?
Well, just that it all culminates in trust, right? So the previous slide, like, everything that leads to distrust, and this slide is everything that leads to
trust. Yep. All right. So when you're building a successful remote team, it's going to start with the culture. And this is not only building what your guiding principles and what your core values are within the company, but resetting what some of those expectations might be when you're dealing with a remote team. So at the top of the hour, when we first started this call, my dog decided he was going to join the call. And that's some of the things that you're going to hear and you're going to have to deal with when you're dealing with remote staff, is that they're not in an office, they're not in that confined environment. And so you need to define what's acceptable and be accommodating to some different things, especially right now in the situation we're in with the shutdowns and COVID, where there's people in the home that probably normally wouldn't be there if you were in a normal remote work situation. But right now there's kids that are in the background and that need attention, and there's other adults that are around, and there's animals, and there's different distractions that need to happen. But you still want to be able to define what is acceptable. There right now, as I'm watching the news, all of the news anchors are working from their home. And, it's interesting to get an insight into people's homes, but you're also seeing where they're working. One guy was working in his son's room, and a number of people, it looks like they have small apartments, and so they're working in their bedroom. And so making sure that as people are presenting themselves, especially on Zoom calls or videos, that you are explaining to them what is acceptable, and make your bed before you start the Zoom video, or pick up your laundry, or little things. Again, just setting that expectation so you can continue to build that trust with them.
And I think right now, of course, standards are more lax than they were in the past. Like, I have a friend of mine who's also a business owner and runs her business from her home. And she had a screen put up whenever she had Zoom calls because she didn't think it was appropriate that people saw her home. Now, of course, that's completely changed, assuming at some point it will go back to that. But, you got to play it by ear as far as what your team is facing and what is acceptable to you. And honestly, like, you might have a different standard for your internal team versus a client-facing call, right? And so you can go make makeshift backgrounds for when you have a client-facing call or a public-facing call or something like that. Definitely. And I think this is also important for even if you're not a business owner, if you manage a team, you set the standard. You are the leader, and so you set the culture of your team or your business based on what you consider acceptable and what you consider not acceptable. And I remember hearing this leadership tenet where it's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate. And so just remember, whether you're a manager or a business owner, it's all on you. You set the culture of your team. And so knowing what's important to you and clearly expecting and explaining and therefore expecting that from your team is what sets the culture and the foundation for your successful remote team. One of the things that I always say is that technology amplifies. Oftentimes when we're talking with business owners about setting up their systems or their workflow in order to be able to work remotely with their Freedom Maker, they immediately jump to tools. Oh, I need this software, or I need that software, or I'm setting up this software and I want my Freedom Maker to help me set it up, things like that. And so what I always say is take a step back, because technology amplifies. So if you have a crappy workflow, technology is going to make it worse. And if you have a good workflow, technology is going to make it better. So one of the things that I'll be talking about shortly is creating those workflows and those systems that allow your team to work together efficiently and effectively, and then finding the tech tool that can make that better or make that more smooth. I've seen that where people go for the hot technology that maybe is too robust for what they need right now. And so then it's overwhelming, and they spend all this time trying to implement it, and they never actually use it because it's overwhelming. And so in our case, like for example, with our onboarding, we started off with an Excel sheet, and then we upgraded to Process Street, and then we just went to Asana. And so as your business grows and you become more robust in your systems, then you can find the software that matches that. So just wanting to give this warning, like be careful about immediately jumping to what tools I need to have a remote team, and instead focus first on your systems and processes, and then finding the tech tools that can amplify that.
And just to add to that, I've been a victim of this as well. I love technology. I love trying new things. Laura laughs because she'll introduce me to something and then I take it to the nth degree. But sometimes that fails me because I get so excited about some new toy or some new gadget that I have to stop and think, is this really going to be effective for my team? And so it's taking that step back, and I've become a lot more thoughtful and a lot more just, I still test it, I still play with things, but I don't introduce them into my team until I am 110% sure that this is going to work in our process. And so going back to that, setting up the process, going through the process, talking through, and I've had to dial back. I've been in the middle of implementations and had to dial back because all of a sudden I realized this doesn't do what I thought it did. It doesn't do what I needed to do, a key component. So it's really important when you're looking at technology that you're looking at it kind of in the bigger picture and not just for today, but also going forward as you continue to build your systems. Because if it doesn't work today, it's really not going to work tomorrow. So.
And in general, what we at Freedom Makers recommend are the freemium models where you can test it on the free version. And then as you start to see it adopt into your company and into your team, and you need more features, then you can upgrade to the paid version. We're generally not fans of the free trial because you still have to then implement it, and then it may or may not work. So in general, we tend to recommend the freemium tools that are available through a freemium model versus a trial model. Oops. All right, so this is my bread and butter, right? So one of the things when it comes to running a remote team is, like, as we were talking about, having those workflows, those systems in place. And one of the sort of the key takeaway that I want to really stress today is triggers. Really take time and think about what are the triggers that, one, launch a workflow, and two, go from step to step. So for example, what's a trigger that causes this workflow to need to be done? Then what's the trigger that gets it from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, etc. So when you are finding that gaps or something's not happening, think about, okay, what happened? Where was the trigger missing? So what I mean by trigger, I mean, obviously, right, is what triggers something to get started, but it can be time-based or it can be action-based. So for example, the time-based is like time of the day, or day of the week, day of the month, things like that. Or action-based, meaning step 1 happened, so now step two is triggered. And that could be automatic through technology, or it could be that your team knows, okay, when so-and-so does step 1, they're gonna let me know, and so then I know I need to do step 2. So that's what the thing is, really think about triggers. So an example, going back to that design, that printing company, let's say instead of assuming anytime an order comes in, they need to do the editing right then and there. Instead, you could set it where, okay, every day at 10 a.m. and 1 p.m., you're going to check the order box and see what new orders have come in, and you're going to edit those graphics at that time. So then now it's more going back to the results focus, right? It's not, oh, this order came in at 10:05 and Joe hasn't done it yet. He must be watching Netflix. Now it's more like, okay, all the orders that came in the morning are done. And so we're good to go, right? So now you're focusing on the results versus the time. And this is important, I think, for us at Freedom Makers, because by definition, we are supporting multiple clients. So they may not be available to do it right when the order comes in. Or in your team's case, it might be that they are available, but their kid walked up with a math question. And so you had to learn Common Core real quick because you don't want to teach them how to carry the 1 or something like that. But then they're still going to take care of it, and it's going to be taken care of in a timely manner, right? I digress. Another example is I pay our bills on the 10th and 25th of every month. And so that's blocked on my calendar. It's a 2-hour window. We don't need to talk about why it takes me 2 hours to pay our company's bills, but it's there. And so that's set. Every 10th and 25th is when I pay bills. So if you were to invoice me today, you're not getting paid till the 10th. So that's how, and that's my trigger. Now, because of that, I go check our mail on the 9th and 24th of every month to see what bills have come in and what checks have arrived. And so the other thing is I really want to start washing my car more regularly. I'm not going to wash it myself. I just know that about myself. So then I found a car wash near my mailbox. And on the 24th of every month, when I go check the mail, I then wash my car, right? So the 24th is the trigger for checking the mail. And then checking the mail is the trigger for washing my car or getting it washed. So those are like very simple examples, but of how to think about and how triggers can work. I heard a woman yesterday talking about she wanted to wake up at 4:45 in the morning to get work done before her kids wake up. And what she found was a deterrent was having to go downstairs to get a cup of coffee. So she put a little coffee maker in the bathroom upstairs. And that was now her trigger to get her out of bed at 4:45 in the morning. So again, very simple examples, but just really think about when you have a gap in your workflow, what is the trigger that can make it not be a gap anymore? One more example, we have our Freedom Makers subscribe to us through a newsletter, and sometimes they'll decide they want to leave our community, which is totally fine. But when they do that by unsubscribing to the newsletter. In the past, I would find out because I would just notice, oh, our subscriber count went down. So then I would go remove them from our other databases where we keep track of who our Freedom Makers are. And that's not a good trigger, right? There's a lot of gaps in that. And so we recently set up a Zap where when someone unsubscribes from our newsletter, it creates a task for us in Asana to go remove them from our other 2 places where we keep track of Freedom Makers. So that's another example of triggers. The decision matrix is around going back to those lanes of responsibility and authority. So you can set up, at what point can they make a decision without you? And at what point do they need your approval to make a decision? And then of course, what are their lanes of responsibility? So just wanted to share with you about 5 levels of delegation. You can Google that, but it's something where you can think about, okay, this responsibility, I'm willing only to let go a little bit. So I'm gonna do that as a level 1 delegation. Or this responsibility, I have no expertise in it. I don't wanna be involved. I need to find someone who's a level 5, who can do that as a level 5. So I'll just leave that at that. I know that's pretty vague, but I do want to save time for other things, but just think about a decision matrix as far as who can make what decisions and within what lanes of responsibility.
And just briefly on the levels of delegation, that a lot of that goes back to trust. It goes back to how much you trust somebody and how much you want to be able to trust somebody. Just to dig a little bit deeper, like a level 1 is that you probably don't have a lot of trust. You're only asking them to do the most basic things, where level 5 is this is somebody that you're basically handing things over to, and you're not expecting to have to follow up on their work.
Exactly. And you can have different levels for the same lanes of responsibility, because then it's all about chemistry with your team.
Right. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is battle rhythm or drum beat. And battle rhythm is for our veteran group out there, and drum beat is for anybody who's worked with me, or cadence is another way to look at this. This is creating a systematic, a cadence of when things are happening and how things are happening, so that there's a predictability to a person's day. Part of this is setting up the systems that Laura was talking about, but part of this is setting up things like, how often are you checking in with your employees? For my team, we have a daily check-in where we kind of run through any hot topics with clients that are going on, but then we have a weekly meeting where we dig a little bit deeper into processes and what can we improve, and where are we seeing problems, reoccurring that we need to actually pull back and look at the entire process, or introducing a new process into our system so that we can continue to build and grow. Doing one-on-ones with employees and having that at a cadence or at a drumbeat where the employees know that once a month they're going to have time, one-on-one time with you, or they're going to get reviews at a certain time, or conversations. And then, as Laura said, if you have tasks that need to be done internally, having those scheduled at a certain time so that the manager and the employee knows at at 10 o'clock and 1 o'clock that graphic designer is going to go in and going to check the work orders and make sure that those are being processed.
Right. I guess a way to explain it is like, it's like a routine at a macro level, right? Your company's routine, if you will. And one of our things is we don't have necessarily operating hours. Anyone can work whenever at Freedom Makers. So you can tell when someone's working because you just suddenly get all this deluge of messages, which is totally fine. And you respond when you work. And so, but yeah, so I like, yeah, battle rhythm and drumbeat is basically a big picture routine.
Right.
All right, so this one I think is probably one of the most important points that we have to make about running a remote team and managing a remote team. And that is, as Sarah was just saying, about having regular check-ins. We definitely recommend that they be on video because non or verbal communication is only 7%. So when you have it on video, you can see body language. And so then it makes the communication more clear. For your regular check-ins, 100% recommend having an agenda. And that way you know what you're going to talk about in that meeting and you know what you want to accomplish. And it has to be written and public. And so what we do at Freedom Makers is what Sarah was saying, we have in our case, it's weekly. So I have a weekly check-in. It's a standing time, same time that just repeats every week for each of my team. And then we have a team call once a week. And we alternate. So one week it's just talking about what's going on with our clients, what's going on with our Freedom Makers, what's going on with our daily operations. And then the other week it's longer and we talk about our projects and what are we working. We set goals for the quarter. So where are we at with each of our projects and accomplishing them in the quarter? What tasks do we want to do that following week? What tasks did we accomplish the week before? Things like that. So we alternate every week we're talking about what's going on with daily operations. And then every other week, it's a longer meeting where we're discussing our projects and where we're at with those projects. The key thing though, is that we have the agenda is written and published, and it's a task that everyone is required to go in and review the agenda the day before the meeting, and they can add anything they want to discuss. And so it's all public, so you can see what others have added, and it's just added to the bottom, and you go down the list. The nice thing about that too is that when it's public, you're also staying on task as far as time. So if you see that someone else has added something more important to the bottom, but you have something minor above that, then you might say, you know what, I'm going to pass over mine so we can get to that other topic. So by having it more public, then everyone is engaged and everyone knows what's going on. After the meeting, we also write up notes for what we discussed and what decisions were made. And our team has to read it and say, yes, I agree with these notes, or there's one change that I want to make based on what I thought we agreed to, right? So now the agreements are public too. So for example, if I said, Sarah agreed that she's gonna have this created by Wednesday, and I'm thinking Wednesday, April 10th, whatever next Wednesday is. And she's thinking Wednesday, 2 Wednesdays later, right? So now she sees that I have a misunderstanding and she can go in and write, no, I agreed to April 17th, not April 10th. So that's the other thing about having it being public. So when we were talking earlier about you avoid those hallway conversations that leave out the remote person, this is how you avoid that, by having it publicly written where everyone has to agree this is what I want to talk about, and everyone has to agree this is what we talked about, and these were the decisions we made. And in our case, we actually had it where I kind of thought people weren't actually reading our discussion. They were just saying, yes, I agree. So then I started planting Easter eggs so that I knew that they read it. So we have some fun on our team. So yeah, so I think this is very critical to having a successful remote team, is having a public written agenda plus discussion and decisions. And then you avoid those water cooler decisions or hallway decisions that can disengage your remote team.
Sounds good. All right, so we couldn't talk about remote teams and employees without getting into the legal requirements, and this is my bread and butter. So there's a couple things you want to keep in mind when you have people working remote, because this is new, and I often talk about the fact that the government is like this big ship, and it's not going to turn really fast. And yes, we've kind of turned on a dime with this pandemic going on, but we also have to keep in mind a lot of these rules that are out there and make sure that we're keeping in compliance with those, so that you're not, so that we don't get tripped up later on, because there's a lot of stuff we don't know about and how the government's going to react. And we're really hopeful that they will see that this is a new way of working, and we need to make some accommodations for that. But we also need to be prepared in case they rubber band back to what those rules were once this is all over. So the first one is the wage and hour consideration. You need to make sure that people are getting paid for whatever time they're working. If they're hourly or non-exempt employees, you need to make sure that they're taking their breaks and their meal breaks, their rest and meal breaks when they're supposed to, if that's a requirement in your state. If you need to make sure that you're managing for exempt, which is salaried, versus non-exempt, which is hourly. So the non-exempt people, if they're working, you don't want them to be working an exorbitant amount of time and end up working overtime, because you do still need to pay that, even if they're working from home. You also want to be conscious about safety. Even though they're working from home, that home or that workspace is now their workspace, which means that it's covered under workers' comp. So when we're talking about expectations of how they set up their workplace, you don't want them lying on their bed and working, lying on their stomach on their bed and working, because suddenly you're going to have a whole bunch of ergonomic claims or repetitive stress claims, because they're screwing up their shoulders and they're screwing up their wrists and their lower back and whatever. So you want to make sure that they have equipment that they can work with, and that they have a good solid workplace workstation to work at. The other thing you want to keep in mind is data safety. You want to make sure that now things are out. You're not necessarily confined in your on your own network. And you're not seeing what their environment is. So making sure that if you're providing them a laptop or a computer to work on, that they know that their kids shouldn't be logging into this and working, playing games on it, or accessing files, or making sure that there's components of safety and security built into your policies. And then the last one is about expense reimbursements. I know in California, I don't know for all of the states, but I know specifically in California, if you require somebody to have a tool to do their job and you require them to pay for it, you are required as a business owner or as a business to reimburse them for that. And so, if you're requiring them now to have internet and they didn't have internet before, then you may need to pay for their internet. And there's ways that you can do that. You can either pay for internet, you can purchase a hotspot for them, whatever you need to do. But if you do start to move towards a more virtual, a more remote team, you can also look at the cost benefit of that, because paying for internet on a monthly basis for your employees is probably going to be a lot less expensive than paying the rent in your office space. So it's, I mean, you want to kind of think it all the way through of not kind of putting the hackles up of like, oh, I don't want to pay for these things, but look at it as as an investment, and it's probably a cheaper investment than working in having a workspace or having an office. So anything you wanted to add to that, Laura, before we go on?
Well, I'll just say, I know it's from the business perspective, it's viewed as an expense reimbursement. The employees might see it as a perk, like, oh, I get internet through my business, or in our case, like we reimburse for cell phone and computer. So they're getting a cash payment for something they already have. But for us, we're helping to cover the cost for them working at home, right? And so it's a win-win. It can be a win-win if it's saving you on office expense, but also the employees can view it as a perk for them.
Right, and because it's an expense, that's not taxed. So it's not taxed as income to the employee, and it's not taxed as you don't have to pay it through payroll, so you don't have to pay payroll taxes on that as well.
Caveat, we're not finance experts, so talk to your accountant.
Right. Yes, we're not promoting anything. We just are looking at trying to look at the pros and cons of everything. So that wraps up the information portion of our presentation. But before we go into Q&A, as Jenny did say, we do have some offers for you. And so from Gos HR, we are offering 2 different packages. The first one we're calling the Pandemic Policy Package. It's our version of the PPP, not to be confused with the Payroll Protection Program that you can apply to your local bank starting tomorrow. But the Pandemic Policy Package, this includes documents that you're required to give to employees now that we have these new policies in place. The first one is the family friendly coronavirus response act, and that offers emergency paid sick leave and emergency family medical leave to employees. And so in this package, we provide the documents that with those policies, as well as a leave request form and a work from home policy that's customized to your company, and any required notices that come out. It includes a 15-minute phone consultation where we go through the customizations, and it's normally a $149 value, and we're offering that for $99 to our webinar participants. And if you want to go a little bit further and look a little bit deeper into your HR processes, we are also offering our HR audit, which includes a policy review, which includes the PPP, as well as a review of your handbook and making sure you're in compliance with local, state, and federal policies, as well as a review of your employee files, your payroll and benefits programs, and making sure those are in compliance. And then this includes 2 one-hour phone consultations. The first is to gather information and to talk about your policies. And the second is to actually go over the report that we file, or we don't file it with anybody. We give it to you, and we go over that report and the findings in that report, so you have an idea of where you might have some holes. And that's normally priced at $595, and we're offering that for $395. We do have a QR code there, but you can also go to go.eoshr.com/COVID if you'd like to sign up for either of those packages. Laura?
And we're offering a battle rhythm audit. So in 1 hour, you show us what you do, and we'll show you how to make it better. We also included in that is a survey of your team for what obstacles are they facing to be able to work remotely, and that will also be included in our report about how to make it better. It's normally $300, and with the webinar participants, we're cutting it in half to $150. You can go to that link or the QR code, and when you sign up, you just enter promo code COVID. I hope that's not too morbid, but and then that'll drop it down to 150, and then it'll take you to Calendly to schedule that call with us. If you find that, I know we have people from all different time zones on this webinar, if you find that there's just not availability for you to schedule that, please just reach out to me and we'll find a way to make it work. So my email is laura@freedom-makers.com, and we'll find a way to get you scheduled if the Calendly spots aren't suitable for your time zone and availability.
All right, so now I'd like to invite Jenny to come back online and let us know if there's any questions that we can answer for our participants.
Sure, yeah, some really good questions here. The first one is, what is your best project management tool? The big one.
Was that a softball? No.
Yeah, right, it's Laura's favorite.
So I will say, again, going back to thinking about what you need, right? So for us, for a long time, we used a software called Process Street, which I loved. And it's basically a dynamic checklist. So we used it primarily for onboarding new clients. And we had something like 25 steps that we went through to onboard a new client. Now, these steps were really granular, like send next steps email, or check to see if the Freedom Maker is living in a certain state. Like, we had very specific steps. And so something like a 25-step checklist that we would launch for any new client. And so that was primarily what we used it for. Then we shifted to Asana, which our whole team just loves. I mean, we should probably become brand ambassadors for Asana. But now the thing about Asana is that it's a little bit complicated to get to know. And so we highly recommend that you, if you're going to use Asana, like, hire someone to help you set it up. But we basically now use it to run our entire business, from our daily operations to also those goals and projects that I talked about. So what we do at the end of every quarter is we have a call, something like a 2-hour call, and we discuss what went well that quarter, what do we think we need to focus on for the next quarter, and then we develop projects around each of those goals. And that's when I was saying, when our weekly check-in, we're checking in on where are we at with those projects. In fact, one of our Freedom Makers has now become an Asana certified pro. And we actually used her to help us set up our Asana. So if that's something you're interested in, I can give you her contact information. Her name is Jennifer Baker. Just look her up on LinkedIn or online, and she can certainly help set you up as well. Again, as a caveat, tech amplifies. So know how you're going to have your battle rhythm in place, and then figure out if Asana is the right fit. Another simple one is Trello. So if you're not ready for something as robust as Asana, start in Process Street, start in Trello, and as you get more complicated or more prepared for complicated project management, then consider upgrading to something like Asana.
Another good question, can you speak to keeping your employees engaged versus micromanaging?
I think keeping employees engaged has to do with communicating with them and that level of trust. So again, we're looking for having a results-oriented workplace. So defining those expectations with them, and again, the regular cadence of checking in. So it might be that when you're first starting with a remote workforce, that you check in more regularly. You're checking in with somebody on a daily basis. It can just be for 5 minutes. These don't have to be like hour-long conversations, but it's just like, hey, how you doing? What's going on? And then kind of expand from there. The other thing are chat tools. Slack is a popular one. Our team actually just installed and started using Microsoft Teams, which is another great tool. It allows us to communicate with each other. It allows us to promote and to give feedback to each other. It has all the little things that you can have that are just kind of corny and goofy and playful, like gifts and stuff, but then it's also a tool to use to communicate about our clients and to ask questions and to keep track of all of those communications.
And I would add to that, if that's okay, about,
yeah,
I think when it comes to being concerned about if you're micromanaging or not, is creating a safe space for your team to say something. And which means you as the leader have to be comfortable with hearing that something's not okay. Right. And so, for example, so I'm in the reserves, right? And next week I'm going to be on reserve duty. And I was telling my team that I may not be as available as I normally am. And I said to them, I said, my fear is that you will start to see me as absentee. So please, please tell me if you need me and I'm not being present enough for you. And so for me, I have to be okay with hearing them saying that, but I also have created, hopefully, Jenny, you can tell me, but I've created a safe space for them to say something if they do feel that I'm not present enough. So if you're worried about, are you engaging them enough or are you micromanaging, create a safe space for them to say something, which means you have to be okay with hearing it.
Will you be sending a copy out of this recording? Where will the recording be available?
Yes, we'll be setting it up. We'll be sending it out, I think, to both of our mailing lists. We'll be sending out some follow-up information, including the slides and a copy of the recording. And then it'll probably be posted on my YouTube channel for EOS HR.
Same for Freedom Makers.
Okay, can you talk about a hybrid version? So some work at home and some office time, and what can't be replaced by working at home?
Well, obviously, if you're manufacturing, right?
There definitely are things like, unless you're going to have a printing press in your home, you're probably going to have that in an office.
Well, I'll say, and Sarah, you might be able to speak more on this, having had more of a hybrid. My team, we work in 4 different states. We see them, on video. We had a funny story where one of them was pregnant, and somehow my brain refused to accept that because I only ever saw her from here up. And so my team kept saying, you have to prepare for her going on maternity leave. I'm like, yeah, I will. And then I just wasn't preparing, to the point where I think it was Jenny, actually, she made her stand up so my brain could see her belly and understand that she was actually pregnant. So we've been virtual from the start. So I can't say that maybe I can speak about hybrid as far as how to balance that from experience, but from my research, I think it goes back to having, even for your team that is next to you in the office, if you're making any decisions or any discussions, they have to be written and published somewhere for your remote team to consider. And so I see that in my reserve work. So, we have the civilians that work full time, and then we have the reservists that work on the weekends. So we're working on how do we ensure that crossover of information is handled efficiently, because of that situation. In that case, it's different because we're never together. But I think it just, at least from my research, it really comes down to having that publicly published discussion and decision section.
Yeah, and I think to kind of carry on with that is understanding that if you're moving from all in office to either a hybrid or all remote, that there's going to be some time in training and transition. And even when I'm starting things and I'm asking my team to do them, I find myself falling into old patterns. And so it's important that we gently remind each other that if something is said, to remind and say, hey, can you remember to put that in Asana or in Teams or in the knowledge base or wherever it needs to go, but keep reminding that until it becomes a natural act. Jenny?
That's it for questions, ladies.
All right.
We're right.
We are right on time. Well, thank you so much for everybody who joined us and who stuck it out here till the end. Like we said, we will be sending out the recording. And anything else you want to end up with, Jenny?
Nope, you guys did great.
And thank you guys, and best wishes in your journey to remote work. And we are here for you to answer any questions or help guide you through that. And so here's to happy workers.
All right, everybody stay safe and healthy.